There is nothing connected with the staging of a motion picture that a woman cannot do as easily as a man. Alice Guy Blaché.
Welcome to Gal's Guide to the Galaxy. Your host, Lisa Leo, leads a roundtable in the universe to discuss women in music, literature, science, and more. Warning, time travel is possible.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Lisa Leo. On this episode, we're talking about movies. We're going to cover the best films centered around female friendships, top movie destinations and museums, stereotypes and female roles, and some gender-focused dialogue tests. I'm most excited, though, to cover the film pioneers whose creations and contributions have shaped the film industry as we know it, and yet you probably have never even heard of them. Until now. It's time to shine a spotlight on these incredible women. But before we do that, let me introduce my guest for today. First is Dr. Leah Leach.
Hello. I'm so happy to be back again. Oh my goodness. I keep thinking you're going to kick me out.
I feel very lucky to have you here, especially since you are a director, or you're a retired director,
I
right?
am retired. I retired 2 years ago, but I was a writer, director, producer for 10 years. And I made 17 glorious little movies that I was very proud of.
That's awesome. 17. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I worked on probably about 50 more projects. I call them other people's projects. So, I would work on the Sci-Fi Channel or Investigative Discovery. But of my little babies, I made 17 of those. The ones I chose to love.
Awesome. So do you have a favorite movie genre?
I do. I don't know if it is technically a genre, and I say this with some kind of certainty because I worked in a video store, and this genre did not exist in the video store. However, I still believe it exists. I like inspirational movies. That is probably the drama section, but there are some comedies, there are some sci-fis that will fall into inspiration, mythic, message-driven. Those are my favorites. Those are my go-tos.
Nice. All right. Next is Phoebe Freer. Hi, Phoebe.
Hi.
We're glad to have you back.
Thank you.
And you actually are currently a director. Is that right?
Yes. So I call myself a filmmaker because I direct, I edit, produce. I started out writing. So I do a little bit of everything. And I actually know Leah because of filmmaking. So she was my mentor, and that's how we first got to know each other before we even started talking about podcasts.
Oh, I love that. That's great. And last but certainly not least is Rebecca Burfanger.
Hello.
Hello. So Rebecca, do you have any experience in filmmaking?
So I don't have necessarily filmmaking experience, but I have a lot of film-related, film-adjacent experience, I guess. So I worked in a video store like Leah, which is awesome. Yes. I didn't know that.
Nice.
And I always get a little sad when I hear blockbusters are gone forever almost. They're not quite, but close. I'm also on a screening committee for the Indie Film Festival. I've been doing that for several years. I'm an arts journalist, which I've done for many, many years. And also, as a lawyer, I represent filmmakers and hope to represent more filmmakers. So that's my film-related experience.
Nice. Yeah. So that's great because everyone's got some level of experience. I don't have any with film. Mine's with theater and mostly just acting. But I like that we all have a certain level of experience in entertainment. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
I want to backtrack because I totally forgot to ask Phoebe, what is your favorite movie genre?
That's a tricky question for me because I tend to jump back and forth. I was going to say drama until I heard Leah say inspirational, and I was like, man, because that's the kind of movie I like to make, inspirational dramas, basically. So I guess that would be my genre of choice, and mystery. So, yeah, I can't pick just one. That's going to be a thing with me.
Fair enough. How about you, Rebecca?
So, yeah, it's hard to pick just one. I mean, I would probably say documentaries. That's what I usually screen for the film festival. And I feel like I watch a lot of movies where I'm like, if this was a documentary, it'd be so much better. And I think the one, I can't, now I'm blanking on the name, but the one where they go on the road trip to see like the first Star Wars movie, or not the first one, but the Phantom Menace, where they go to George Lucas' estate. I always thought, what is that movie called? You guys remember what I'm talking about?
I know the one you're talking about, and it's not Saving Star Wars. That was the local Indiana film that was made. No. I know it was produced by Kevin Spacey in a Trigger Street film, and I cannot remember the title. I will go back to and find it out.
But I kept thinking it was a documentary when I was hearing about it, and then when I started to watch it with friends, I was like, this would be better as a documentary. And my friend was like, yes, exactly. I wish it was a documentary.
As a filmmaker who's made documentaries, that makes me so happy.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, the other one I guess would be like, I also like foreign kind of weird movies. So like I wrote about French New Wave. I guess another thing, in college I wrote a lot of film papers, and I'll end up talking about that, I'm sure, in this podcast. But one of my papers I wrote was about French New Wave and the connection with French journalists. And I kind of want to get back into that, but I don't necessarily have time. And I don't know if that sounds like pretentious to say, well, I like the French Nouvelle Vague films and documentaries, but that's just what I'm into. Like I know not everybody's into it, but that's kind of my thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like fantasy and sci-fi. I mean, that's my favorite, and I think mostly because it takes us outside of our own reality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I get to explore things that probably aren't possible, and characters that aren't possible, and worlds that don't exist as far as we know. Does anyone have a favorite movie they want to share?
I have a favorite movie because I was trained very early on to always be able to answer this question. Mm-hmm. It seemed like I remember probably the first real interview I got as a filmmaker, like this was their instant question. I was like, oh man, I need an answer to that one.
Right.
Because then the second one was, what was the budget for the movie that I just watched of yours? And I'm like, okay, well, I know that one. So those are the two common questions for any up and coming filmmaker. What's your budget? What did you film on? And what's your favorite movie? And they will judge you on all of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So my answer is unfair, but then again, so is the question. Because I believe there's two different kinds of favorite movie. There's a favorite movie that you would watch every day if you could, and you would never get sick of it. And then there's a favorite movie that you rarely ever watch because when you watch it again, you want it to be brand spanking new. You want to forget how much you loved this movie until you see it again. So the one that I could watch every single day is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the Sidney Poitier, Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy movie. I love that movie. I learn something new every time I watch it, and I highly recommend it. And then the movie that I barely ever watch, so I remember its genius, is Casablanca.
Yeah,
because I love that one.
Oh
it's very good if you wait. Yeah, if you wait, it'll happen. And Rebecca, the movie was called Fanboys that you were talking about.
Oh, yes. Fanboys.
There you go. That's how my brain works.
Would have been better as a documentary. I'm sticking to it.
It really would have. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
All right. So I want to just get right into our main discussion here because we have so many exciting things to talk about. So first, let's start with a fun article from Gal's Guide. It's 26 movies about female friendship, and these are just perfect for a gal's night.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to talk about our favorites on the list, any on the list that we haven't seen that we would like to view, and anything that you would like to add. So, Phoebe, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so my favorite from the list was actually, it was kind of a toss-up, but I think I have to go with Pitch Perfect. Just because it's kind of got the whole package. It's got singing, it's got girl power, it's got a little bit of everything. I love all the gals there. And the runner-up to that is League of Their Own. So it's like, those are my two top picks for my favorite from that list.
Nice. How about you, Rebecca?
So there are so many good ones on this list. It was hard to just pick a couple, but I think after reviewing it, I think Bridesmaids, because when I watched it when it first came out, I was about the same age as the characters, and I have a lot of friends who are getting married, and I could really relate to them on a level maybe I couldn't when I love Fried Green Tomatoes, but I was a kid when that came out, so even though I love that movie, I wasn't quite. I mean, I guess they were kids at some points in the movie, but I wasn't the same age as the
You didn't
main
gel with it
characters.
right away. Like it wasn't you right now.
Yeah. Like I thought it
Yeah.
was, I loved it, but I was like, I liked it for different reasons. And then maybe for teen me, maybe like Clueless, because I was like, oh, I was kind of the same age as the Clueless characters when that one came out.
Oh yeah.
But I still haven't seen Hidden Figures or the new Ghostbusters, which I know is a
No.
shame.
It's
so
okay.
I know.
There's still
I
time.
know.
There
Right,
is.
so hopefully I'll get around
We
to
might
it.
ask
but-
you in
I
a
don't
week
shame.
though if you've seen it yet though.
Right.
They are pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Melissa McCarthy in Bridesmaids is pretty much as hilarious as you can get.
Oh yeah.
She is
yeah.
my doppelganger physically. She is way funnier than me though.
But I love you both.
Like, and I was almost thinking like one that was missing that I don't know. Someone just said something that like you said it perfect for a girls' night in. Like I just recently watched The Heat with a couple of friends, and that movie.
You're right.
I'm sure I'd
That
seen
was
it before,
genius.
but it was just so funny. And they're not quite friends in the beginning, but they kind of get a friendship, or I guess they do things that friends would do, and I don't know.
They form a friendship throughout it.
They don't really have boundaries, or at least Melissa McCarthy's character doesn't have boundaries. So, that's probably the one I would. I mean, I had a couple other ones I listed before this, but I think that's probably the one I would add at this point.
Leah, how about you?
My favorite is Hidden Figures
Yes,
or
I
A League
guessed
of Their
it.
Own. But
Guessed it. Yes.
I didn't want to say A League of Their Own because I said A League of Their Own for the sports list of movies that we had.
Oh,
so I was
yeah,
like,
shoot.
well, there's
Oh,
going to
but-
be a common theme.
No, we're gonna
If I
keep
pick it
saying
every time.
League of Their Own.
Yeah. So it had to be Hidden Figures. And then, you know what ones that are on here that I actually haven't seen? I haven't seen Pitch Perfect. I have somehow missed it.
Wow.
I haven't
And
seen it either. Yeah,
I
I've
don't know
missed it
how I've
too.
missed it.
Oh
And
my
then
goodness.
Frances Ha. I hear so many great things about Frances Ha, and I have not seen that one yet, so I want to.
Wow. Yeah, so Leah, we're pretty much on the same page just about, because I wanted to go with A League of Their Own and also felt guilty about episode 2 sports, where we gushed about A League of Their Own then. I'm like, I can't gush about it again.
True.
But then I thought, why not? It's that
It
good.
really is that good
though.
If it's
Yeah.
good,
It
it's
still
Yeah.
came out of my mouth, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I am going to still mention it, but I do also want to say Now and Then.
it's
I
good.
have
Wow.
not seen
Yeah.
it since
Yeah.
since I was a child, but that is all about female friendship. I mean,
Yeah.
from childhood to adulthood, and I think that's really sweet. Something I'd like to see is Ghost World, because I've never seen that one, and I thought
that was on my
um,
list
that-
too. Yeah, I haven't seen Ghost
yeah,
World.
that and Frances Ha, just like Leah.
Ah, look at
Yeah.
that.
And I was thinking for a little while about a movie I would want to add, and I thought of the perfect one. It's The Babysitters Club.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's right. With
yeah.
Elizabeth Shue, that one.
This was the one from
Oh.
1995
You're
based
right.
on the Babysitters Club book series.
Yes, I was thinking Adventures of Babysitting, which
You're
was
thinking
not
of
based on the
Adventures
book.
of Babysitting.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. And the Babysitters Club was all about friendship and running a business as teenagers. It was so sweet.
Aw.
Yeah, and there's another one called For a Good Time Call, and it's I don't know how much detail I should really get into on the podcast about it,
Oh,
but
go
it's two
for it.
it's two roommates who are trying to make ends meet, so they get jobs on a sex hotline.
Nice.
And they're two totally different women, but they form a friendship, and it's really interesting to see less typical like women who just click and they just get along really well. They have a bit of they have an uphill battle in trying to get along with each other. They're more roommates than friends at first, so it's an interesting dynamic to watch.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that idea. I like that dichotomy. It's not perfect to begin with. It's not like they've been
Yeah.
friends forever. It teaches you how to actually have a friendship. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
I
yeah.
dig it.
Yeah.
And just real quick, I would add, two movies that me and my mom really, really love that we always watch together is Practical Magic and Chocolat. They're like Chocolat is more
Oh,
like
yeah.
a mother. Well, actually, both of them are like sisterly or like mother-daughter relationships. So those two are like really strong like on the forefront of my mind when I think of like female-powered films.
Nice. Yeah.
I love Practical Magic. That's a great one.
We'll
Yeah.
watch that any day of the week. We'll just be like, what do you want to watch? Practical Magic? All right, let's go.
And done.
Yep.
Tuesday night is figured out.
Pretty much.
Yeah, because you get the sisterly bond and the friendship.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great one. All right, so now we are going to go straight into our time travel gal.
Yay.
And I think we're all really, really excited for this lady because she is very, very special. And this is Alice Guy Blaché. And to give a little bit of background, everyone should know who she is. She is known as the first female filmmaker. I mean, that's a pretty big title.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
It's a very big deal.
Her innovations include, yeah. Now she's got a lot of things to credit, so bear with me. I'm just going to run through these really quick. Her innovations include being the first to tell a story on film. She essentially created narrative filmmaking. She was known for her motto, "Be natural," when referring to performance and acting. She was the first to use synced sound, which led to the first music video. She was the first to feature interracial casts. She made over 1,000 films, one of her first being The Cabbage Fairy, which she made on, her lunch break. No biggie, right? She was also the first female to run a movie studio, which was also the largest pre-Hollywood studio in America in Fort Lee, New Jersey, way before California.
Yep.
In 2013, she was inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame. And back in 2012, Martin Scorsese accorded her the Directors Guild of America Lifetime Achievement Award, saying, "It is the hope and intention of the DGA that by presenting this posthumous special directorial award for lifetime achievement, the Guild can both raise awareness of an exceptional director and bring greater recognition to the role of women in film history."
I loved that.
Yeah.
I remember that day too.
How about that?
That's how I learned about Alice was Marty. Yeah, I loved that.
Wow.
I was like, I'm sorry, I never heard of her. I went to film school. I never heard of her.
It's ridiculous.
And I was like, Martin Scorsese's telling me about her, and I'm like, oh, I gotta learn about her.
Oh, yeah.
So she's not really taught in film school?
She was not
No.
taught in film school at all. No,
That is a tragedy.
it really is. Considering
Wow.
what you're learning when you're learning about, especially when you're learning about independent production, which is very much what early Hollywood was. So early production, creating a studio, creating new narrative and using new technology, she would be a fantastic role model for film students.
Absolutely.
And she's not taught. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's terrifyingly sad. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So that was the first thing I was going to ask was how you first learned about her. So Martin Scorsese.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I had been making films for a very long time, but not till 2012. Yeah. Did I really
Wow.
hear about her? And
Wow.
it makes you feel bad as a filmmaker.
Oh my
like,
gosh,
wait,
yeah.
this is my passion. This is my industry. You know what I mean? These are my pioneers and my heroes, and I didn't know.
Exactly. Like, she's our role
but see-
model. And, like,
But
she's like the person I should have known about from the start when I decided, hey, I want to be a filmmaker. She's the first name that should have, like, rolled out of somebody's tongue. Like, it should have been Alice Guy Blaché. But I did not hear about her until me and Leah started a podcast about Gals of History. And that's when Leah taught me about Alice Guy Blaché. And as soon as I started researching it, I was like, I wanted to cry because I was like, I should have known about her so much sooner. I've been doing this not as long as Leah by any means, but enough years that I really, really should have known about her, and I didn't. And it was like, wow, she is like our mother of film. She is who I have to thank for being able to do what I do today.
Wow.
But see,
That's-
weirdly, I knew about her and I didn't do film school. So
I know. That's what's
How
so
does
weird.
Interesting.
How
Yeah.
did you learn about her?
So I wish I could remember exactly. I know I did a paper about women filmmakers in college, and I probably just looked up women filmmakers in, I don't know, the card catalog or
Right.
something.
That makes sense.
And I remember and when I went to Ball State, they had videos of movies that she had. I mean, this is how long ago I was in college in the 90s. So they had video that you could check out, and I would watch some of her movies, and I was like, oh, this is really fascinating. Or maybe it was just like one video that had like compilation of, because not a lot of her stuff
survived.
It still exists.
Yeah, but whatever they could find. I mean, I remember there was like a video, and Leah and I have talked about this at length actually, which is kind of funny because like how I found out about her in the mid '90s, I wish I could know. But then I also had this when my parents went to Europe for one of their anniversaries, like in the early 2000s, maybe like 2001, I want to say. My dad saw, and I probably talked about her with my parents or family, whatever, because I thought she was so awesome. And they had this like French magazine from the airplane or something that had like a whole article about her in it. And my dad brought it home, or he mailed it to me. I was living out in a different city at the time from them, and he like mailed it to me and was like, "Hey, I found this article. I thought you'd find it interesting about this woman filmmaker." I was like, "Oh, funny you sent this to me because like 2 years ago I wrote a paper about her."
That's so amazing.
But yeah, so how I knew about her, I wish I knew like the whole story, but I just know it's something that. But I also knew that not a lot of people knew who she was. Probably similar to a lot of other filmmakers I'd studied, knowing like, okay, not a lot of people are going to know who a lot of those older filmmakers, because again, like their stuff either didn't survive or they're just not talked about as much today, even if they were like her a huge influence on the industry, but just don't necessarily get the credit for, or at least she doesn't get the credit. I think we would all agree for what she contributed even back then. And I think too, it was one of those things in one of the articles I read about her back then. I still remember they mentioned how back then, like filmmaking for a lot of, I guess, various reasons was considered kind of like a hobby. And especially if a woman was doing it, it was just kind of like, oh, she's just on this fun little thing she does with her movie making. Even though there were filmmakers then, it wasn't like she was the only one doing it.
Well, there was no money in it, and there was no shelf life. Right. Like once they showed, they weren't even keeping a lot of times the reels. So it wasn't a business yet, which was unfortunate.
Right.
But she still had the opportunity to be able to innovate in that space that she wouldn't have necessarily had the same opportunity like 10, 20 years later if she hadn't already been in it. So I don't know. So I think, I was just like a big women's rights person in general. I mean, obviously I was writing about her when I was in school or whatever. I just, I find her very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking, like, I hadn't heard of her before listening to the Your Gal Friday podcast, which, by the way, I should mention, if anyone wants to hear it, it is episode number 1.
Yep. It's our very first. We had to. We're both filmmakers. We came together because of filmmaking. I mean, it was.
She is a priority.
Yeah. I was like, this is number 1.
It's still my favorite. It's still my favorite of all the podcasts.
Thank you.
So. Yeah. Yeah.
It's still my favorite.
So well researched, and it was super interesting. And the thing that I was reminded of listening to that episode was I kind of relate her to film what we relate Sister Rosetta Tharpe to rock and roll.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison.
Yeah. And, and once again, I was able to learn about her from Leah, Your Gal Friday. I mean, it's amazing how much stuff, like if you don't seek out this information, like
it will pass you by.
It'll pass you by, but then I also like start panicking, like what else do I not know to seek out?
Correct.
This is incredible.
Well, that's why Your Gal Friday has one episode every Friday, as long as our season allows, so we can at least fill that void as much as possible.
Exactly.
So it's like, don't panic, but yes, there is more to learn about. But I am also a firm believer of these gals will come to you when you need them. You know what I mean? Like when you start to seek out who were the women that were doing such and such, or what were women doing around such and such time, you'll find them. And that's when you're kind of supposed to, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
They kind of call out to you a little bit like a muse or a siren.
Yeah.
It's true.
So it's got me thinking, like, why haven't we heard of her? Why is she so hard to find information about? And I'm curious if anyone has a similar take. I feel like it's probably a combination of, for one thing, we're talking about the fact that the film wasn't really well preserved back then. They didn't, hold on to the reels. The biggest obvious one, she was a female and probably never taken nearly as seriously as her male counterparts. But I'm also curious if the fact that Fort Lee did very little to preserve pre-Hollywood studios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If maybe that has something to do with it, because if there's some level of historical preservation, it's a lot easier for people to go, oh wow, look at there's a museum, there's a landmark over there, we can go explore and learn something. Whereas if it's a grocery store, I mean,
it's a grocery store now.
It's a
Alice's
grocery store
Studio
now.
is
Yeah.
a sign in a grocery store.
Yep.
And her house is a noodle house. And it's like,
yeah.
To me, when I was there and I was just looking around, it's Fort Lee has moved on, and they, for some odd reason, did not want to cement their time. At one point or another, because we're also talking like 1894. You know what I mean? We're talking early on, and I mean, New Jersey and New York, things change by the minute there. But it is very peculiar to me that they did not want to hold on to that heritage.
Yeah.
There's something odd there about that. And I feel it, and I feel sad when I'm there.
Exactly. I agree. I feel very strongly that a big part of it is the fact that she was a woman, because or people know the name George Méliès. Like, I knew of that name. There was a movie Hugo, which is one of my favorite movies, but it featured George Méliès, but it should have also included Alice Guy Blaché, which it didn't. And also the fact that I wonder, does Hollywood even want to admit that there was something before Hollywood? Like, they don't want you to
good
think,
point.
no, Hollywood's always existed. That's like kind of what they want us to think. Like, we've always been here. These are the rules. This is how it's always been, but it's not. And so I kind of wonder between those two, like, there's still not fair pay for women in Hollywood or fair recognition. So it's like between those two things, I feel like it's like, okay, this sadly kind of makes sense.
I kind of go with history is told by the victors, and Hollywood won.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. That kind of gives me chills.
I know, and that's
sad.
why I feel sad when I'm in that because remember, D.W. Griffith was right there with Alice too. They were all making movies in Fort Lee, New Jersey. So so the big names, Thomas Edison even had one of his first, you know what I mean, kind of like the black box, you know what I mean, the filming sort of thing. Those were located in Fort Lee, New Jersey, because there was space and the light was good and the sound was good and things like that.
Right.
But having them forget about it, I do feel like history's not going to remember us. They're going to remember the victors of Hollywood. So we'll just let them have that one then. We've still got Bruce Springsteen. We'll take that.
Yeah.
We got Bon Jovi. We're okay.
Yeah.
The Sopranos.
So I actually want to share a kind of cute little story about Fort Lee and Alice Guy Blaché, because when I was listening to your Gal Friday and you were mentioning that you went to the area and it was just a grocery store, I was like, wouldn't that be funny if that was a grocery store I was in a few years ago?
Oh, no.
And I looked it up because, yes. So I think this was back in 2014. My husband was born in Fort Lee. And all of his relatives are from there. And we went up there for a family wedding. And I thought, boy, wouldn't that be the funniest thing if it was the same location? And when I looked it up, I almost fell out of my seat. I was squealing like a child. And I think it took me 20 minutes to come down from I can't believe this. This is so crazy.
That's amazing.
And just to think it was the same spot, but also further proving my point, I had no clue. There was nothing.
Yeah. Oh
there
my
was
gosh.
nothing that indicated it. I'm walking into a store. I'm buying some bagels. I have no clue.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing there.
You have to know to look for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's sad to me is that where I'm from in New Jersey, they honor Thomas Edison.
Yeah.
They have the museum set up. They have all these recreations. What's the word I'm looking for?
Exhibits? Is that what you mean?
Thank you. They have an exhibit of his laboratory and all that kind of stuff, right?
Very much love him, yes.
And of course, probably because he's a dude.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh, he had a great PR campaign.
we obviously can't use the argument that they just don't like preserve historical landmarks and places of significance.
Not true.
It seems to be a specific one that just wasn't cared about. But yeah, I couldn't get over that. I was like, wow, I was in the same spot and I didn't even know it. That was so funny when you mentioned that. I was like, I have to look this up right now. So
that is a wonderful serendipitous thing. I love it when that happens. That's creepy.
Yeah, I could not wait to share that with everyone.
That's amazing.
Like, I don't know if I can hold this in. So, I want to ask if any of you could go back in time and meet Alice. What would you want to ask her? What would you want to learn from her? Rebecca?
I probably ask what she thinks of digital short movies that are not. I mean, I'm not saying they're not easy to. They're not easy to make, but I wonder what her thoughts would be, because obviously when she was making her movies, it involved a lot more in terms of like she had to make up her own special effects. Now, like anybody with basically access to a video editing program that pretty much comes with almost every computer, or Snapchat or whatever has all these filters you can add. I would just kind of be curious what she thinks, or maybe she think it was great because it would, you could be more creative, or maybe she think it was stupid because it's not as creative because you're using somebody else's idea to do that. I mean, I don't know. That would be my question for her.
That'd be a good one.
Yeah. How about you, Leah?
It's gonna sound dark and morbid, especially with me being retired, but I would honestly ask her from my heart, if you could do it all again, would you still do it?
Yeah,
if she
it's
knew
valid.
that she would get forgotten, if she knew that people
she
wouldn't know
watched
what she
herself
created,
get
would she still
forgotten.
do it anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah, she lived until the 60s, so she saw the industry start to make money, and that breaks my heart. So that's what I would want to know, but I also don't want to know. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because if her answer's no,
hell.
then that would just break me.
I would understand. I'd be like, I respect that.
No,
Either
I
way,
would understand, but I'd be like, what do I do then?
It would break
Right.
Phoebe.
How about you, Phoebe?
Well, I think I would, like, if I was visiting her, I would explain, like, where Hollywood is now, where I am right now, and I'd basically just ask her advice. Like, what would you do if you were me? Like, what can I do to help be a pioneer like you were? Because I honestly, like, she was such a huge pioneer that it's hard to be like, okay, I can make a difference like that. It's really hard. So I wonder, like, would she go to Hollywood? Would she stick with indie? Would she, like, what kind of advice in that kind of respect would she give me is what I would ask.
Very nice. Yeah, I think I would probably just ask her, how on earth did you create 1,000 films?
I know, right?
How did you
It's like
how did you
mind-boggling.
avoid burnout? How did you not
That's a
run out of
good
ideas?
question.
Like how did you do that and raise children
Yeah.
and be a wife
And run a whole company,
mean,
yeah. She was like 3
it's-
films a week, wasn't it?
Yeah, 3 films a week. Yep.
Insane.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely insane. And I also, man, it would be so great to actually time travel
Wouldn't
with
it?
our time travel gal.
Oh, it would.
And I would love to see pre-Hollywood.
I
Like,
would have too. I think I would have really liked it. I think I would have liked it more. I went to Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think, to Phoebe's point, Hollywood's attitude that they're the only game in town or in the country, I mean, it does mostly hold true. It's really hard to put on a production most other locations because they kind of have a monopoly on it.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to think that there was a time that this it's a beautiful area, but just so unassuming. Like, you would just never know
Mm-hmm.
the glamour and all the potential that Fort Lee had. It's so crazy. It could have been just outside of New York City. You could have had the New York City Hollywood.
Yeah,
It's
I
just-
wish
it's
it
crazy.
stayed
It would've been
so
cool.
much. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's definitely, it would be within driving distance of me, so I'm slightly biased in that respect. But no, it would be so
Oh,
cool
nice.
if Fort Lee was still here.
Yeah. Is there anything else anyone wants to mention or share about Alice before we move on?
I always love the fact that Alice made more films than D.W. Griffith and Georges Méliès. I mean, actually, if you add those two gentlemen's films together, you have the total amount that Alice made.
You got it.
On her own. And I think that's phenomenal because I, of course, was taught D.W. Griffith and I was taught Georges Méliès in film school.
Right.
And it's like, interesting. Okay, then.
Wow.
Yes.
I mean, and I think too, she had like a sensibility that I don't want to say only like because she was a woman, but I feel like her film, like they're not necessarily feminine, but there just seems something more, I guess, because that's her whole thing, be natural. So it just is very like
they're grounded,
human and grounded, and things that we want in movies, even in 2018. Like if something's fake, you can spot it a million miles away. But I don't think hers. I think she was genuine, which is another reason why making so many was so amazing. So it's like, how do you keep doing this? But maybe again, sometimes it's just like if the artist shines through on their work. I feel like that's kind of her, or that is her. That's her work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's her canvas. Yeah, absolutely.
Aw. I feel like it's so bittersweet.
It really
It
is.
is.
No, it really is.
You get a touch of what Phoebe and I are doing every
week
on your Gal
Every
Friday.
week we
end
do
up
this.
crying
We
over these
do.
ladies many times.
We
And
do.
it's like,
It's
oh,
always
I'm
always
fine.
a
I'm just crying over so and so this week.
right, exactly.
But
It's
that's why you
always an
guys do what
emotional
you do.
roller coaster every single week.
Yeah, we really feel for them.
Mm-hmm.
But just keep sharing.
Yeah.
Just
And-
keep
and
sharing
I
their
think-
stories, and that's all you got to do.
Exactly. And I mean, it's not that we're the only ones that will ever tell their story, but we
Right.
feel a responsibility that if we're going to tell it, then we need to honor them.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And tell
Yeah.
their story right and authentically and, not judge, but present it as it is, but then also learn from it, no
Right.
matter how ugly it is. So, yeah, it's lovely.
Oh, and I also think that what makes Alice so special is she did all of this with probably, I think it's safe to say, with no assumption of fame or anything
Oh,
like that,
no,
because this
yeah.
was new.
Yeah.
This wasn't something where we know what film is now, and we know that there's people who do it for their passion and the art, and there's those who do it for that and maybe also for fame or just are chasing fame. But she did this clearly because it's what she loved
Yeah.
more than anything else, and that's awesome.
I kind of relate it to this. I was asked to give a talk about female pioneers, and I was trying to relate it because it was younger kids. So I was trying to relate it to today's standard, because it's like, ooh, movies, they've been around my entire life. The very first YouTubers, the first people who said, my job is I make videos for YouTube, that is what it would have been for Alice being a filmmaker.
You're right. Yep.
It was
Yeah.
ridiculous only a few years ago that you would make a living at that anybody would watch it for more than 30 seconds, that YouTube would exist in a few years. So that's the closest that I have to modern day to relate to what Alice was doing, is being a YouTuber. And it's sad, but I mean, it relates.
It does. No, it makes sense.
But it is a good parallel. Yeah. Wow. Well, Alice is incredible, and we probably could talk about her for days.
This is a dangerous can of worms with me and Leah.
Well, we have a couple more to cover. We're going to move on to some more film pioneers, and these are all women that came kind of on the heels of Alice. We have 3 more that we're going to talk about, and obviously there's plenty more out there that we're not covering, but these are just a few of the standouts, and it's mostly for the sake of time. But let's talk about them. We've got Lois Weber is the first one, and then we're going to talk about Dorothy Arzner and Margaret Booth. So should we dive in each one separately?
I think
Talk
so.
about one at a time.
Yeah,
Okay.
give them their chance in the spotlight.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Lois first. So she was the first female Hollywood director and the highest paid at one time, even amongst her male peers, which, wow.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
It's hard to imagine, right? She was the first to use split screen, the first to have female nudity, the first to use controversial subject matters like abortion and birth control. She owned her own Hollywood studio, and she was the only woman in the Motion Pictures Directors Association. And one of my favorite facts, she was the first mayor of the brand new Universal City.
Yeah.
I love that one too.
Oh, that's
it was
good.
contested too, but she was.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah, they wanted a recount.
Oh.
They're like, wait
Okay.
a minute, but she still
Sore
got it.
losers.
Though. Yeah, basically.
Wait, could women vote even back then? Like, could women vote in 19? Whatever that
It was for mayor, so I'm assuming, and it was a brand new city.
1913?
Yeah, it was some kind of weird. I don't know how she got in, but also it was California. I mean, it's the Wild West,
Yeah.
really, at that point.
That's true. That's true. They probably had their
That's
own,
true.
own
Yeah.
laws.
So, was everybody familiar with Lois? I mean, I would imagine if no one really got to learn about Alice, we probably didn't learn about Lois either.
No, I didn't. I hadn't heard of her before.
No, I heard of her because of Leah again. When we did the Women Pioneers podcast, we covered 4, right, Leah? We covered 4 different ones.
Yes.
In that
Yep.
one episode, and Lois was one of them.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, this was part of my research once I went into the shame spiral that is not knowing Alice. I learned about these other women.
Because that's how Leah rolls.
Exactly. I make up for last time.
Nice. Okay. So next, and I just want to briefly go through all the women so we can kind of dive a little bit deeper into some questions about them. Dorothy Arzner is the next one. She had started in Hollywood around the end of Lois's career.
Mhm.
So it's kind of interesting, this sequential timeline.
Yeah, they kind of bump
that we
against
had.
each other almost to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then they
yeah.
push the industry forward, as you'll see. Yeah.
Dorothy edited Rudolph Valentino's Blood and Sand. She saved Paramount lots of money by using stock and B-roll footage. She directed Clara Bow's first talkie, which that's so cool
The
to
It
think.
Girl.
Now we're into the talkie, so I love that. She was the first woman admitted to the Directors Guild of America. She also launched the careers of some pretty notable women. We've got Katharine Hepburn, Rosalind Russell, and Lucille Ball, one of my
Mhm.
favorites.
Oh, yeah.
I think one of the coolest things about her was she invented the boom mic.
Yeah, she did.
Mhm.
And later in life, this was one of my favorite facts that I got to learn from the Your Gal Friday podcast, was that she became a teacher at UCLA, and one of her students was the Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, that's my
That's pretty
favorite
cool.
fact about her, too. I mean, I love the boom mic, but the fact that she was the Godfather's teacher in California, I love
Wow.
that. Yeah, that's
Yes.
cool.
So awesome. Oh, and I should also mention that all of these women are covered in the Film Pioneers podcast, which is episode number 10 of Your Gal
Yes.
Friday. Yes.
Oh, yeah, we had a fun time talking about these
Oh,
ladies.
Was it hard to narrow down who you wanted to talk about?
To a certain extent, yes. This one was one that I kind of steamrolled because I wanted to do a linear story. So I
Right.
wanted to be Alice opened the door for who, and then Lois kind of opened the door or was passing the baton to who, and so on and so forth. I kind of wanted to show an example of women opening the door for other women.
Absolutely.
Because that was important for me.
Okay. Because I was impressed by how they all just kind of seamlessly went from decade to decade in the timeline. I was like, this is flawless.
They
Nice
needed
job.
to. And that's why there's plenty more women to talk about that we
Yes.
also haven't heard of. But yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final woman we're going to talk about is Margaret Booth. And she started as a patcher for D.W. Griffith in 1915. She became a cutter, which I guess is what we now call an editor.
Mhm.
And she was known for cutting to a rhythm.
Yeah.
And before I go any further, Leah or Phoebe, would you like to explain that cutting to a rhythm?
Oh, Phoebe hit it. You're an editor.
Okay.
I always hated editing.
Oh no, I started writing and then editing. So yeah. So cutting to the rhythm. I don't know if you've ever listened to a music video and it's like the beat goes with the take or with the cut or that kind of thing. It's sometimes it's like a full body experience for me, because at least for me, just cutting a video, all I have to do is hit the space bar. So it's like you're listening to the music, and space, and you're right there. That's what she was doing, except for she had to physically cut film. So that's even more impressive. I am honestly, you'd have to play the music and the film at the same time, and then stop them at the same time, and then physically cut the film and not have super anxiety about physically cutting something, and then glue it back together and then keep going. Like that's what Margaret Booth did, which is crazy. I mean, I don't know. It makes me so excited that this is something that she did.
Yeah.
Wow. So actually way more complicated than with digital,
absolutely.
the luxury of having everything
I've
on a
always
computer.
been thankful
Wow.
that I grew up in a digital age, because I'm so much farther along right now than I would have had I started in film, because like even for the sake of just money, film costs a lot of money. Digital costs less. So even just for that fact alone, I understand a lot more about film than I would have had I started on actual film. I still want to learn actual film, but my point being that because I live in a digital age, there's a lot of things that are easier now that we don't think about as being difficult on film. Now with that, our jobs are still difficult because we have to learn a bunch of things that they didn't have to learn. So it's still not simple anymore, but it's
still a craft.
It's still a craft,
Yeah.
right? But it's different. Like when you're thinking about me cutting a film versus Margaret Booth cutting a film, they're completely separate things, but the same kind of outcome.
Wow. I feel like I should have known better. Like I should have realized she's doing that on actual film and not digital, because I was like, well, that seems like a cool thing, and I wasn't even considering
no.
like
Right.
But
how
then-
incredibly difficult
Yeah,
that is.
and you
The
have
permanence of it.
exactly that would just I don't even know if I could have been an editor or a cutter just because of my anxiety, because I would just be like, but what if this isn't right? At least with digital, you
Right.
can undo what you just did, or you can save this clip and insert it later or something like that. With film, it's permanent. You're done.
And
Yeah.
what Margaret did is she was taught to edit first by using what was remaining on the cutting room floor. So whatever was on the floor that was discards,
Yep.
She just got to play with it and try to make a story out of nothing.
Right.
And so you could mess up there. It was a safe place to fall.
Yeah.
So knowing this certainly explains the rest of her, her resume that we have to talk about, that she was basically the go-to editor at MGM, and pretty much most, if not all, films really didn't leave the studio without her imprint. Even if she was uncredited, she had a hand in the editing of these films.
Correct.
And we're talking some big deals like Ben-Hur, The Wizard of Oz. These aren't, nothing. She was also Oscar nominated for editing Mutiny on the Bounty. And in 1978, she was awarded an honorary Oscar, which is so cool. She was honored with the American Cinema Editors Career Achievement Award in 1990. And her final film was 1982's Annie. And she had the longest spanning film career out of all 4 film pioneer gals that we've covered.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, you could see how over the course of time, the change from Alice, who got no recognition, to Margaret being awarded, being acknowledged for her work, and some level of appreciation. It's interesting to see over the time span how that recognition changed with each woman, how it grew and evolved.
On the shoulders of each other.
Yeah, unfortunately, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you could spend the day shadowing any of these 4 women, who would you pick, and what would you hope to learn from them? Rebecca, would you like to go first?
Sure. I mean, so obviously I'd love to shadow Elise, but I think after kind of just going back through these and talking about it just now, I really appreciate Dorothy Arzner's story. I don't know if it's because she started out wanting to be a doctor and then decided to be a filmmaker.
I love that too.
I always just find that fascinating because I've had multiple careers and I'm not even 40 yet, but I always appreciate people who kind of reinvent themselves, although I don't think she really got too far into the medicine world of medicine. But I think just reading more about her and just about, she invented something, even though she didn't have a patent, people still gave her credit for it, which is kind of outstanding. Mm-hmm. And then also reading about how she didn't make it a secret about her sexuality, which is also a huge deal.
Yes.
That
I love
probably that. People, I mean, I guess, whatever time period you talk about, there's always different levels of, but also it's Hollywood. People, like we said earlier, it's California. People just kind of go with whatever.
Wild
and then, Wild West. Yeah, Wild West. And then the whole, and I think too, just I didn't realize the Coppola connection, even though I should have read this before the podcast, but the Coppola connection is really interesting because I actually have a Coppola thing I was going to mention later in the podcast for one of our other things. Which I find him, obviously we all find him fascinating too, even though he's a dude and we're talking about women today. But I would think her, and I think just, kind of like the other pioneers, like what do you think of today's, if we were going back in time, I could show her something from the present and being like, what do you think of this? Is this good? Is this crap? Would you be proud to be part of this world, or would you, or maybe there's some movie that, she'd be like, oh, but this movie really resonates with me. I really would have enjoyed working on, so I think that would be my question again is what do you think of today, today as in 2018, whether it's technology, whether it's actual quality of filmmaking or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah. How about you, Phoebe?
Aside from Alice, I'm not going to choose Alice because we just talked about her. I think I would go with Margaret Booth just because it fascinates me how she could be a cutter. They say you make a film 3 times, once in writing, once in filming it, and once in editing it. And so she made a lot of films, and it's awe-inspiring to me how she could become this person who literally everyone comes and requests her opinions on things. I would have so many questions for her about how did you overcome trying to overthink maybe if this is the right cut or not. How do you see the big picture when it's all in film right in front of you? Just learning from that aspect would be so fascinating to me. I feel like I would learn so much about editing my own films.
Yeah, definitely. And I would just be fascinated to see conversations where men are asking a woman in a professional setting for her professional opinion.
I wish I was a fly on the wall for that.
Did they interrupt her? Did they interrupt her in her answer? Or,
nope.
That I can't even picture that, especially in that time period.
Absolutely.
There was a scenario of a famous story that is always told about her. And she was showing the cut to the director, and they're always trying to be very low key of who the director necessarily was, or what the film was. But she's like, so you're telling me that you want that on a 40-foot screen? And then she waited for the answer. And then they would say, no, I don't. Correct. You do not. She was no nonsense. She knew what worked and what didn't. And people came back to her, not because she was sweet, but because she was good and she was right.
Exactly.
So that's how you get to stay. And from 1915 to 1982? I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's talent right there.
And honestly, if I could go back in time and meet her and have her say I'm doing even a moderately good job, that would just be like, all right, my life is in a good spot.
Yeah, and from what I learned, she lived to be 104.
Yes.
So she lived through the entire 1900s, which is just amazing to try to wrap your mind around all that she has witnessed and experienced and just been able to be a part of. It makes me like
life.
excited, and
Yeah.
yeah, it really is. Absolutely. Leah, how about you? Who would you want to shadow and learn from?
I can't get it out of my head. I would want to shadow Alice because I feel like we'd be on horseback and we'd be patrolling through the New Jersey studio. We would check on set builds. We would check on costuming approval. We would film in the afternoon. And I feel like it would be a film assembly line. Like, I never really cared about, Henry Ford and the whole automotive assembly line, but the idea of like a film assembly line run by a woman being on patrol on horseback by a woman, I'm like, yeah, no, I'll take that afternoon over anything. I think that would be amazing just to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I did manage to find some very short clips on YouTube of her on set.
Yeah.
And that to me is more fascinating than watching the actual actors, like the behind the scenes of the actors on set. It's like, no, there's Alice. Like, she's the celebrity.
Right.
At least to us, right? I mean, she's the one that is just so fascinating. And I just really get a kick out of that. Like, I could watch that over and over and over. There's something so amazing about watching these films that were made before even the 1900s. They're so incredible to think about the creativity and the willingness to take chances and invent and create and do something that's never been done before. Like, we don't really have a whole lot of those opportunities these days because it's all been done.
Right. Well,
and now it's
so
more
far
about,
we think dun 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 dun.
Good
What's
point.
on the horizon?
Good point.
It's very
Yeah.
hard to see forest from the trees when you're in it, but at the same time, who knows?
Absolutely. No, you make a good point.
Virtual reality might be a thing. I don't know. Who knows?
I had a hard time thinking about who I'd want to shadow because I was like, can I pick all of them?
Yes, just pick all of them.
I'd like to say all of them. And I feel very closely to Alice's story because I'm like, it's New Jersey. It'd be so great to see like way back then what it looked like, because that to me is more interesting than Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because we've been able to see the old Hollywood glamour. You could see the photos, you can see footage of that. That's been preserved in a way.
Yeah.
But to see something that's no longer there, it's gone, would be fascinating. But I actually was going to go with Dorothy because I really liked the fact that she worked with so many famous people. Like, I would have loved to have been there the day she discovered Lucille Ball.
Right. Oh yeah.
That to me would be so cool, to just like walk next to her and be like, forgive me, but I'm going to be starstruck all day.
Right.
That would be incredible. But then at the same time, now that we've been talking about Margaret with cutting to a rhythm, and now that I have a better understanding of what that really involves, I would like to just sit and watch that. I probably wouldn't even ask questions. I would just want to watch her whole process and see how she works. And of course, just seeing their interaction with men. That really fascinates me more than anything. How they've worked their way through their careers while putting up with sexism. It would be really incredible to be able to have witnessed that.
Yeah.
And compare it to what we go through nowadays.
Yeah, that was another question.
That was really interesting.
That was actually the question. That was the question I had in my notes that I would want like in the era of Me Too, would they just laugh and be like, nope, that's just what was expected back in our day? Like,
right.
People
That
play
was
grab
every
ass
day.
and you just went with it, or else you didn't have a job. Like, I wonder, or was that not the case? Like, were they just, like you said, like Margaret Booth was.
This was work, and never the two shall meet. Yeah,
yeah,
it was
like
professional to a certain extent.
Yeah, maybe it was more professional back then. Maybe it was, if you were able to make it as a woman, like you had to have some sort of quality that you just, that you wouldn't be pushed around or whatever. Not that. I don't know. I'm trying to be careful how I word it, but
I'm with you. It's a good point. Maybe it was a certain a certain character, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? That kind
Right.
of made it into the director's seat and to the editing booth. And it's like, well, you don't mess with those ladies.
Right.
You have a snide comment, you know, over a brandy, but you don't mess with those ladies.
Right.
Yeah, kind of like how Margaret got the directors to answer her with a question like, I don't want that on the screen.
It's power.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we move on, if there's anything else anyone wants to say or discuss about any of these amazing ladies, please do so. I hate having to move on because this has been so fascinating to talk about, but you have the floor.
I mean, I just think there's so many women pioneers we don't know about. And that was something that I recently learned from, I think Leah and I were talking about this recently, that there's even like the person who created the Creature of the Black Lagoon was one of like the first female animators for Disney Studios. And I learned about that from some guy who's just really into monster movies. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I think she toured with it, but then it became a whole thing due to copyright issues. I don't know. There's always some legal reason that things kind of go haywire. But just learning. Her name is Millicent Patrick. And I think, and she was more in the 40s, so she was a little after these gals. But I feel like we just, like we were saying earlier, there's just so much we don't know, or so many people we don't know about because they're not included in school. They're not included in, mainstream culture or whatever. And I think it would be, I hope we can get more attention on some of these women who are, even though they're behind the scenes, they're not any less worthy than like the starlets of their day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They're hardworking gals.
Yeah, I would love to see Alice become a household name like that. That would be a nice little goal. Is like, I want Alice to be known at the very, very least. Like that's, yeah.
Be lovely. There is a documentary that they're working on. It was a Kickstarter project that was funded, and it's called Be Natural. It's the Alice Guy Blanchet documentary. They're still working on it. I think they're doing some good work, and so hopefully that will help. Robert Redford was part of the Kickstarter.
That's right.
He was on the on-camera interview, and so a lot of
great.
Hollywood celebrities are putting their money where their mouth is and telling Alice's story in a very dramatic way. So hopefully that documentary will be a game changer in some ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's awesome. Yeah, nothing saddens me more, though, when people don't get their credit until they're not here to enjoy that.
Yeah,
Right, but
absolutely.
we're here to at least make sure she gets it.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think, in a day and age when we're trying to raise young girls to know that they can do anything, that their potential is limitless, if we're not teaching them about the history of women who have done this, who have achieved it, and we're only showing them, well, this guy was the first who did this and this guy was the first who did that. That's the biggest disservice we're doing to, our younger generations of women, because that's what really gets me the most about all of these pioneers.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Is if we're not teaching about them, then how are we to give these girls an example of women who have already done this,
Right.
It really just hits you right in the gut.
It does. I mean, because I very much relate. I thought that either I knew I wanted to be in the film industry when I was like 10 years old. And I thought I had to be an actress because I saw that. That's what you see on the 40-foot screen. And then I thought, well, I have to be a writer because for some reason I see women writers, in television and books and, so women are writers. Okay, so I have to do one of those. And it wasn't until I saw Penny Marshall direct Madonna and direct Tom Hanks that I'm like, that's a job. I like that job. I want that job. So you do to a certain extent need to see it to be it. So it really helps. So whether it's a lady, from 1894 or 2018, it really does matter because little girls are watching.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And what movie was that you were referencing, Leah?
Oh, I believe that was called A League of Their Own.
We haven't mentioned that one
We haven't
before.
mentioned it in like half an episode. We haven't mentioned A League of Their Own.
How long can we go without mentioning this one movie? Not long.
It's gonna become a drinking game, is what it's going to go.
It is.
It's like
That would be great.
If you have on your bingo card A League of Their Own, please mark it now.
Yeah, basically.
No pressure. We have to just find a way to incorporate it into every
No,
episode
we've
of the
mentioned it
podcast.
enough in Your Gal Friday just because we have, not even realizing we have.
Just happens.
It just happens all the time. Oh, man.
Okay, well, with that transition, we're going to move on
You're welcome.
to 9. Thank you, Leah. You bring the puns and the transitions.
I try.
So now we're going to talk. I hope you've enjoyed part 1. We'd love to have you join the discussion using the hashtag MovieGals to share your favorite film pioneer. And stay tuned next week for part 2.
For more exploration, including show notes and links, visit galsguide.org. Add your voice to the discussion on Twitter at Gals Guide Galaxy. Support our mission by becoming one of our Patreon members. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Gals Guide to the Galaxy. Thank you for listening. Returning you to Earth in 3, 2, 1.